You're listening to Things You Should Know, and I'm your host, Andy Ngo. In this episode, I interviewed Göran Adamson, a sociology professor at University West in Sweden. He's been dubbed the Swedish Jordan Peterson for his no-nonsense stinging critiques of multiculturalism. He is the author of the 2015 book, The Trojan Horse, a leftist critique of multiculturalism in the West.
We haven't had a war for a long time. The Danes, they were fighting against the Nazis, and Norwegians too. The Finns were fighting against the Nazis, and Russia and Sweden were neutral. So it's like Swedish politicians and Swedish people, we've lived for like hundreds of years and we don't know, we have forgotten the virtue of saying that this is ours and we think this is good and you might not like it, but we are happy with it and we'd like to defend it. Maybe that leads me on to my own research, namely multiculturalism, because I think that multiculturalism, it's said to be an idea whereby you can live together with other people and everybody's happy and laughing, and there is something ingrained in the idea of multiculturalism, namely the idea, sometimes it's just alluded at, but the idea that other cultures are enriching, fascinating, good for you, and you should allow an influx of these people because diversity is a good thing. But the problem in Sweden, and I think the problem with multiculturalism, not only in Sweden but in the entire Western Hemisphere, is that these ideas are being defended with no arguments. It's like diversity has become a good thing by itself. But the point is that you need to ask yourself one question when you talk about diversity. You need to ask yourself, who are these people? And if you would invite somebody for dinner, you'd say, we don't know who you are, but you surely we will be enriched by your presence. You couldn't say that because that's ridiculous. But when it comes to foreign cultures overseas, on a collective grand scale, this is like the rule of the game. And it has been the rule of the game for 10 or 20, 30 years in Sweden. And I think in Europe, but also in Sweden, I think these tendencies are probably stronger than anywhere else in the West. And so the bottom line here is that we have come to a situation where you are supposed to cherish everything unknown. Everything you do not know anything about is supposed to be good, and things you know a lot about, for instance, Swedish culture, Swedish traditions, are not as good. Yeah, I think that people are starting to understand that multiculturalism doesn't work because we just don't know who these people are. We need to find out. You can invite somebody to your party and that person might be fine. And then you invite somebody else and that person doesn't somehow mix with your crowd. This is a banality. This is a complete banality. But when it comes to politicians and these virtuous, tolerant left-wingers, they simply no longer understand these, basic facts. If I just speculate, I actually think that multiculturalism is not only on par with the Marxist hypnosis, the Marxist delusions of the early 1970s. I do think that multiculturalism is far stronger, the impact on the Western community, Western society is far stronger than the impact of Marxism ever was, because Marxism, the interesting difference between Marxism and multiculturalism is that Marxists never pretended to be somehow in line with the state. They were always very clear with their political agenda, with the fact that they had a political agenda and they were opposed to other people. The terrible, the very shrewd thing with multiculturalism is that multiculturalism has somehow fused with the state. Now we have, for instance, diversity advocates. Everything related to diversity. They have become administrators at the university and all over. And so people have forgotten that these people actually are fostering a very radical ideology, a very strong radical ideology.
What is that ideology?
Well, it's multiculturalism.
Which is what?
Which is a very strong, and I think that the funny thing here is that multiculturalism pretends to be a nice, cool, leftist, social democratic, progressive, radical idea. I would claim, and that's what I say in my books, I think that multiculturalism is a conservative or even reactionary idea. Because I mean, if you just take a simple example, if you look at one of the most cherished ideas in multiculturalism, ethnicity is fantastic. You know, it's the group, and you need to protect the group. Yeah, but if you have a look at the pillars, the basic ideas around which ethnicity is revolving, these ideas are like the idea that ethnicity has to be homogeneous, the ethnic group is homogeneous, you need to protect the ethnic group, and the ethnic group is surrounded by threats all over. There is a very interesting comparison here. You can compare the idea of ethnicity with the idea of nationalism. And I think that if you do that, you realize that the idea of the ethnic group and the idea of nationalism, there are a lot of parallels here. A lot of parallels. And one way to show that there are parallels between the idea of ethnicity, which is supposed to be a leftist idea, and the idea of nationalism, which is clearly a right-wing idea, is if you have a look at the idea of ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing. It's called ethnic cleansing. Yeah. So if people talk about ethnicity, when I teach multiculturalism, I say that ethnicity is a fabulous idea, and everything connected to ethnicity is great and warm, you know, and cozy. But then we have the idea of ethnic cleansing. And when I say this to my students, you know, they are a little bit shaken. And then I say, look here, you need to understand that the idea of ethnicity is dangerous. Yeah? But the funny thing is when you talk about, you know, multiculturalists, advocates of diversity, they don't seem to realize that there is an enormous overlap between the idea of ethnicity, the role of the ethnicity as an idea, and nationalism as an idea. So that's one reason why I think you could say that multiculturalism could be seen as a very conservative or even reactionary idea.
When the average layman hears the word multiculturalism, he or she thinks of multiracial, and so anybody who's critic of multiculturalism, they perceive to be racist.
Yeah.
Now, how do you counter that?
Well, there are two words. And one word is, of course, one idea is the idea of multi-ethnic society. I mean, you're here, you come from Vietnam, and I'm here, I'm Swedish, and this is Denmark. That's okay. That could be okay, you know. But that's one thing. That's just, you could say, that's just a fact in London and in Paris and in many, and even in Sweden now. But the idea of multiculturalism is something different, because multiculturalism as a political idea, it revolves around the idea that we would benefit from people from other cultures. We benefit if there are people coming from other cultures into our country, into our organizations, into our communities, into politics, because it's supposed to be enriching, you know. And so the idea is that if we like only stay together, conversations will be bland and pointless, and so we need fresh blood from the outside somehow to spark conversations, to spark politics, to spark social life, etc. And so this is like some kind of a underlying idea in the whole agenda of multiculturalism. But the problem here is this is not necessarily the case. Yeah, and I like just a very simple example. I lived in Bangkok a couple of years, and I was sitting on the Bangkok BTS. And I was sitting there and I was listening to people, and they talked in Thai. You know, they talk Thai. And same in Vietnam, you know, you listen to people, and you don't understand anything. Yeah? But my point here, the problem here is that I think that if you don't understand anything, you're not interested, you're bored, and you want to get out. You want to talk to people you can understand. And language is very simple. It's a very simple common denominator. And you can see these things also in Trollhättan, where I work. And there were a Swedish couple walking down the street, and they were surrounded by because Trollhättan has taken on a lot of young migrants from Afghanistan and Iran, and they were also walking around there, and they were talking their language. I don't understand it, and this Swedish couple, they didn't understand it. And then I thought, they just took a stroll on a Sunday afternoon, and then I sense that they are walking around people and they don't understand what they're talking about. And this is like maybe even a platitude, but I think you can have it as a case in point. In order to feel some kind of understanding, to have some kind of common understanding and feeling of being together, or commonalities, language is a good thing. And if you live with people and they speak Arabic or they speak any kind of foreign language, there will be a growing sense of, this sense of solidarity will somehow come to an end, I think. And this is dangerous for society. I think society, we need, of course there's a benefit with people from other cultures, like I meet you, for instance, there are good things in it. But we meet, you know why we meet? Because we have a common interest. And this idea that you will be fascinated, thrilled, want to know more about somebody you know absolutely nothing about, that's ridiculous. It doesn't happen. It will never happen. People are not like that. They never will be. Why is the Sweden Democrats so big? Well, the Sweden Democrats, they are so big because they are saying basically the same things as the Social Democrats said in the 1950s and 60s. They are saying the same things.
The Sweden Democrats are a populist right-wing party. They are frequently demonized in the press for their anti-mass migration position and their criticism of cultural relativism and multiculturalism. They received their best performance to date in the national election in September 2018 with nearly 18% of the popular vote.
There's a famous speech by then Swedish Prime Minister Tage Erlander, who was really father of the country. And he said at the time, he was a social democrat, and he said, the reason why Sweden is such a prosperous country is because we have such a homogeneous population. So we know each other, and it's more like a big family. We are such a homogeneous population. Could you imagine the Social Democrats saying something similar today? They wouldn't. Because now they all preach about the virtues of diversity and the danger of being alike, being homogeneous. Because homogeneity now, being alike, for the present Sweden Social Democrats, is almost tantamount to fascism. See? So they have, in order to escape, this is also maybe a reason why the Social Democrats have become so, politically lost. They have like this big danger. The danger is fascism. The danger is racism. The danger is xenophobia. The danger is Islamophobia. And they associate anything that has to do with being homogeneous, anything that has to do with being united, anything that has to do with sharing similar views, anything that has to do with solidarity, almost, I would say. They associate this with fascism or with dangerous political ideas. Hence, they run towards multiculturalism. They run towards multiculturalism, they run towards diversity, and they think that the more diverse, the better. And if you compare this ideology today with what he said like 40 years ago, we are a fortunate country because we are very homogeneous. You realize that the old social democratic values and the new social democratic values are extremely different. Extremely different. And so again, as I said before, what the Sweden Democrats, what they have realized, that there is a void in politics. There is a void in politics. Nobody wants to touch it. For instance, saying things like, we want to have a homogeneous population in Sweden. So they say it. And then they know that deeply ingrained in Sweden are these old social democratic ideas of homogeneity, of sameness, of being united. And they bring it up again, because they know that nobody wants to touch it. And then they say, well, if nobody else wants to touch it, I will touch it. And I will bring it up and I will say, this is what we stand for. Because all the other parties, they just shun it. They refuse to touch it. But we realize that there is a, what do you call it? You seep into the minds of, you seep into the minds of the consciousness of the ordinary population. And they love it. And so, so that's I think that's one reason why they are so strong.
Why? I'm looking at issues that voters in Sweden care about, and I see that immigration and integration are some of the top issues.
Yes.
Why is that?
Because we have taken on over the last few years, we've taken on hundreds of thousands of people from basically the most, you shouldn't say, but alien, different cultures you can imagine. Somalia and Muslim countries. And these people are very different. And you can just take a very simple example. A friend of mine, he wrote a book, it's called between clan and state. And you can bring this up. This is a very good point because this is not like such a hot potato. Because people who come from these countries, for instance Somalia, they live in a clan-based society. You know, society is based on the idea of the clan. They don't have any idea of the state. So the clan and the family, that's what counts for these people. And then they come to Sweden, and Sweden is a completely different society. And then, I mean, this is part of their culture. So there is a huge gap between their culture and the Swedish culture. A huge gap between their culture and the Swedish culture. And this creates enormous integration problems. For instance, if you don't trust the state, you don't trust the law, you don't trust the police, you don't trust basically hospitals, and you want to bring in your state. Namely, your state is your family and your clan, and you want to bring it on, and you want to push for your values all the time. And there was an example about a week ago. A friend of mine told me that what people are doing in clan-based societies, they try to negotiate all the time. They negotiate. If you get a no from one bureaucrat in Sweden, they go to another bureaucrat and they push because this is what you do in a society where there's no state. So you want to push your values all the time. So that's what they're doing, and then my friend, he told these bureaucrats, you know, this is what they do. This is nothing new for these people, and they are not doing this because they are vicious. They just do it because this is the name of the game in these societies.
What are things they want?
Well, they push for better. They push for more money. They push for better housing. They push for, you know, not being forced to work so much. They push for. That's what they do, and this is like very costly for Swedish society because we are a society where people are used to. I mean, if you get a no from a bureaucrat, you just accept it. You just think, well, silly bureaucrat, but you can't do anything about it, you know, and you pay. You're used to that. You pay, and next time you think, well, it's the law, you know. You accept the law because the law is it's like an agreement we make. We are abiding to the law, we are abiding to the state because we have been, what do you call it? We have been marinated in these things. We've been marinated with the state, so we have it inside of us, you know, in the DNA structure. But people who come here, they have nothing of that. And then there are tensions, and I mean, I'm just about to write a report a report about the relation between crime and ethnic background, and that's another thing. We know basically what it'll be about. It'll be that the likelihood for an immigrant, especially an immigrant from the Middle East, to commit crimes, especially sexual crimes and rapes, is much, much higher than for somebody from Sweden or somebody from Vietnam, for that matter.
Well, I saw the media reports. Didn't some news station in Sweden looked at the backgrounds of those who have been convicted of sexual crimes, overwhelmingly represented as foreigners.
Yes. And if it's about gang rapes, it's like 100%.
What's the truth about no-go zones?
Well, the truth is that there are a lot of no-go zones in Sweden. And some people say there are no no-go zones. Well, go there. Yeah. You can go there. You can have a look. And if the police goes there, police can tell you the truth. Then you can say, well, the police are racists, the police are paid by the right-wing thugs. Well, you can say anything you want, it's fine. But it's just pure nonsense. Everybody knows what's going on. Everybody who lives in these areas knows what's going on. Like 2 weeks ago we had, I'm not sure if you knew about this.
Fire.
Yeah, 140 cars set on fire in southern Sweden. But I happen to, do you know why these cars were set on fire?
No.
I know that.
Why?
I can tell you. Yeah, because a friend of mine, he works with, he's giving courses for Swedish lawyers and Swedish police force. And he told me that, you know, because officially they said, we don't know what's going on, we don't know why they do this. And then he said, well, we should know because you can find out. What happened was that there was a clan outside of Gothenburg, and there's a no-go zone outside of Gothenburg, and the police had caught them, and police had taken, I don't know, a lot of cocaine. Like they grabbed it, and then the clan wanted to, take revenge on Swedish society. So they started this, and it was coordinated, and it was 140 cars, like basically saying, don't mess with us. If you do this, we do this back, so fuck off. So this is what's going on now. This is like, logically, you can see this is a game. It's like a game of chess. You know, who's the strongest here? And the Swedish police is, of course, very strong. We have a military, I don't know. And now the Swedish Democrat says, the Swedish Prime Minister says that maybe the military should go in here. And then I think that's just madness. Anyway, we have the Swedish police, and we have the foreign gangs, the clans, and they are very strong too.
What cultures do they come from?
There are some Christian groups from Södertälje is ruled by thugs belonging to some kind of Christian minority. I can also give you, because my friend knows a lot about this. So it's not only, if you say that these are only exclusively Muslim thugs, that's not true. They are predominantly Muslims behind it, but not only Muslims. Anyway, so what's going on now in Gothenburg and in many other cities is like a war, or I don't know, but it's a kind of a war where these two forces are, who's the strongest? And the problem with the Swedish police is that even though the Swedish police is much stronger, of course, we have to abide by our own rules. We can't do anything we want, yeah? Because if the police makes the slightest mistake, the police will be just harassed by Swedish academia, because because Swedish academia is very leftist, generally very leftist, especially in the social sciences. But the opponents, these gangs, they can do anything they want. So they are much stronger by virtue of they can ignore the law, and they do it all the time, of course. But there's a war going on like this, and I think that in a sense, these gangs, they have acquired a lot of power, a lot of force. So I'm not sure how you should somehow get rid of them. And my friend, who is an expert in this, he says that what you should do, but yeah, maybe I can't quote his name, but he said that what you should do, you should just close your eyes for a couple of weeks, and you should tell Swedish police that do what you want, just stamp them out, throw them in jail. He said that what you need to do, you need to take not the individuals, but you need to take the whole clan, put them in jail, and say that if you make one more move, you're out for good. And the problem is that in Sweden you're not allowed to do these things. You can't do these things. You can't be, because our law wouldn't allow it. But in Sweden, the problem in Sweden is if you say these things, and I think it's not ridiculous to say these things, but if you say these things in Sweden, you will be ferociously attacked by social workers and the dominating discourse of left-wing academia, saying that you are inhuman. You have no respect, you have no understanding, and you're a right-winger, and you're a racist, etc. These things come automatically. I know this because I'm one of them. You know, the only thing I say that I want to have a discussion about these things. But if you say that, if you write these books, I do. If you are fortunate, people will not say anything to you. They will just be completely silent. But if you're unlucky, they will start attacking you a lot. So I think that in Sweden that the situation has become, we have become far too lenient, far too understanding with these gangs, and I'm not sure if it's too late now. I think what's happening now is we have a polarization. So you could say that previously we had like this: the thugs or the extremists were here, and then everybody else were voting here. We were all 95% were here, the mainstreamers. But I think what's happening now, this is like, I wrote a previous book about this. What we're seeing now is like the floor of political mainstream is caving in. It's a political polarization. People are running left, and mostly people are running to the right. And I hate to bring up Europe in the 1930s, but I think there is something similar going on here. Political polarization and the complete escalating distrust between left and right, between the good people and the people perceived to be bad, namely people who have a certain sense of patriotism, certain sense of nationalism, and all of these people are branded like racists and far-right thugs, etc. And the spark that could, what happened, for instance, what happened in Norway at this place Utøya, the Norwegian Utøya. He killed a Norwegian guy. He killed about 80 Norwegian young social democrats. He shot them because he said this is like the next generation, the next generation of multiculturalists. I want to kill them, and nothing happened. There were mournings and there were funerals, 80 funerals, young children killed, but that was it, because these people were all Norwegians and they know that we need to keep calm. But imagine if this would happen, if there would be a similar right-wing thug doing a similar thing to 80 Muslims. This might happen. I'm not saying I hope it won't happen, but I'm saying that there is a lot of tension out there, and eventually there might be a spark. And if this happens, or if something much smaller happens, suppose you would have like a couple of Swedish men going out there, trying to kill a couple of Muslims. It might happen. Then, if that happens, then that's the end of it. Because the sense of community, we don't have that sense of community. You can kill 80 Norwegian youngsters, and the sense of community in the Norwegian, society is very weak. There won't be any, the Norwegian community will not rise to kill this guy and kill everybody like him. They won't do that. But if you do the similar thing to the Muslim community, if you would kill, 5 or 10 Muslims, I hope it won't happen. It would be terrible. But if it will happen, the response will be furious. I wish I could be more optimistic, but I'm not. I think it's going to be too far. And yeah.
What's the truth behind immigration and criminal behavior?
I mean, there are two explanations, and the explanation among the politically correct is that it's all about socioeconomic factors, unemployment, they are poor, etc. Hence they do these things. But then everybody who would be poor and who would be unemployed would do the same things, and they don't. There are predominantly people from certain cultures, certain regions who do these things, and Muslims are sadly overrepresented by these things. So I think that answer somehow shows that the socioeconomic explanation doesn't hold water simply. And so the other explanation is the explanation where you say that it has to do with culture. And the sad thing here is that if you say that, you are immediately dragged into the political minefield. And people say, oh, you talk about culture, that means that you defend these rights, etc. But I think you must be able to talk about, this is a problem in Sweden, and this is a problem I think throughout the West, that whatever you say about these things, it becomes political, like a hot potato. So you can't say anything about these things without being accused of being on one or the other sides. But I think you must be able, and I do it, and my friends do it, we say that the explanation clearly has to be cultural, predominantly cultural. Because, for instance, if you come from a Muslim society, women are not, we don't treat, the women, they don't have the same position as women in the West. This is like, then of course you can say that all Muslims are not alike. Of course they're not. But there is a difference, and everybody knows these things. So then if you come here and you see women walking around alone, and then they say that, and they often confess these things if you interview them. They say that, well, she was walking alone, and to me that was a sign of this and that. So I think what is important here is to come somehow also to try to find an explanation that not necessarily will fuel the support of right-wing parties. Because if you say that, they come from these cultures, they come from Afghanistan, they come from Iran, they come from, Somalia, where a woman is supposed to be something different. A woman is supposed to be, has a different position in society. But if you explain this, and if you say that, they come here and they have this culture in the back of their head, they are not only thugs, they are not only rapists, they are young boys with another culture in their head. And to say that, then you might actually overcome. You see what I mean? You might actually find an explanation which in order to help people, anybody, you need to know what's going on. And the problem in Sweden now is that for 30 years, political mainstream have been completely uninterested in trying to find out the correlation between crime and ethnic background, because they think that if we talk about these things, the right-wing parties will benefit from it. So you can actually say this is part of some kind of party politics, where the Social Democrats, they have, I think this is part of the truth. The Social Democratic Party, they have said that, or they have thought that if we talk about these things, we will lose voters. It's simple as that. If we say these things, we will lose voters. Yeah. So we're not going to talk about these things. You see what I mean? But the problem here is that if they don't talk about it, they will lose voters too. And let me just, because I think this is interesting, let me go back to Sweden in the 1950s. I'm writing a new article about this, and part of this new article is about, what's happened with the Social Democratic Party these days. Because in the 1950s and the 1960s, the Social Democratic Party had a huge respect among the general population. Whatever they did, people were on their side. They could basically do anything they want, and they were supported. And now, the Social Democratic Party, they are saying that we have such a problem, because if we talk about these issues, if we talk about, if we bring up the problem with immigration, or if the Sweden Democrats say things and we bounce back and we talk about it and we want to oppose it, then we are replicating their ideas and their views, and they will benefit from it. See what I mean? And then they say, but if we don't do it, if we say nothing about it, they will benefit too. Because then we leave all the floor to these people, and that's also dangerous. But my question here is that, have you ever thought about why this is the case? Have you thought about why whatever you do, you will lose? Where is the self-criticism here? This is my question to current social democratic parties. If you talk about it, you will lose. If you don't talk about it, you will lose. Think about Social Democratic Party 50 years ago. Whatever they did, the people were on their side. Now, whatever you do, the people will punish you. The people will be against you. So my question here is that, have you thought about what have you done? What have you done? How come we have now in Sweden a big party, the Sweden Democrats, with roots in National Socialism? Yeah? And this party is almost the biggest party in Sweden. Have you thought about why this is happening? And their explanation, this is very, very annoying. And this is also part of the problem. Their explanation is because Swedish population, we become racists. Yeah? The Swedish population is racist. Yeah? We're Islamophobes. Swedish population, we become Islamophobes. Yeah? That's it. That's their explanation. Good, solid working class voters. Not only working class. Why have they gone from a moderate leftist position to a radical right-wing position in 10 years? So that's my question to the leftist, multicultural Swedish establishment. And they just don't give an answer to that.
So, no-go zones. Is it true that the police and ambulance, they don't go in unless, ambulance don't go in unless they have police escort?
Yeah. And
that's an actual policy.
Yeah. Well, I think so. Yes, that's practically that's what they do. Yeah, and you could joke and say that, and then the police, they won't go in unless they have ambulance support. So, and this is completely new in Sweden. If you want to rescue somebody, then youngsters are throwing stones at you and trying to, chop off the hose for the fire brigade, etc. And we have other things like if you deliver mail in Sweden, that's also like a no-go attitude. You don't mess with the mailman. Yeah? But now the mail service is being interrupted because there are thugs taking the mail, burning the mail, creating a mess. And I have no evidence, but all of these things didn't happen not long ago. So sadly, there seems to be a very clear correlation with immigration. Yeah. But if you say these things, then people say the automatic response by a lot of sweet people in Sweden is to say, well, you just blame the immigrants for all these things. And I'm tempted to say yes. It's becoming the whole discussion is becoming very strange because everybody knows that this is going on. Everybody knows that there's a terrifying correlation between the influx of immigrants and sexual crime, just like in Germany. Everybody knows that. And still there are hundreds and hundreds of people, and I think in academia is dominated by people who still say these things. Oh, you just blame the immigrants, or you just blame the Muslims for this. And then you have to say yes, because they do it, you know. You see what I mean? But there's still a tension between people who somehow refuse to see what's going on. And those few, but we're actually getting greater in number, who actually say that this is a problem. Because unless you address the problem, unless you try to clarify what's going on, you can never solve it. You can't solve it. But clearly there's a correlation. And there are, I mean, a lot of these services in Sweden, they used to be what people did. I mean, I always thought this is wonderful image of solidarity in a society. When the ambulance is coming or the police, people are on the streets, they stop their cars and the ambulance can pass by. It always makes me soft inside when I see that, you know, because then I think, well, there's still a sense of solidarity in society. You know what I mean? But now you have these very, very, very basic agreements, like based on the state, based on being together for such a long time. You know, we are homogenous people. Now there are people coming, and they just don't respect these very, very basic ideas.
Why the hatred of these institutions of the state? They seem so innocuous. Male, for example.
Or maybe, you know, they come from societies where they are very male societies, where, you know, and then they come to society where they can do basically anything they want, and they will not be punished for it. And if they will be punished for it, there will be a social agent or a social worker caring for them. So the response, I mean, if you come from Afghanistan, for instance, to Sweden, it's more than a cultural shock, I would say. You come from a society which is extremely male, extremely harsh, and you come to a society which is extremely, very, very, very understanding, tolerant. And then I think many of these young men, they just freak out, and they realize they can do anything they want. And I think there is a problem here. I think there is a problem because my own experience is that if you show these people, these youngsters, I've done it a few times. I was almost robbed once in Malmö by a gang of immigrants. But I held my ground, and I told them, you can't do this. This is outrageous. You shouldn't do this. You will end up in jail. Go home. What's your name? You know. And then I sensed that they respected me. You know. So if you show them that this is not accepted, they somehow. It's a compliment in a sense to tell them that this is wrong, because it means that if you criticize somebody, it means that that person doesn't behave the way you expect that person to behave. You know what I mean? But if you steal my wallet now, and I say, well, I understand that because you had a troubled background, it's like saying there's no hope for you. There's no hope. There's really no hope for you. You can go on like this because everybody will understand you. But inside of this understanding, there is something very dark, namely, you cannot change. This is your fate. But if you tell somebody, stop this, you idiot, there's a compliment inside of all these things, namely, I expect better from you. I mean, this endless understanding, this endless compassion and justifications, and saying that, you know, the very idea of the marginalization, yeah, and people are marginal. I mean, these phrases, it's like somebody else who does it. If I'm marginalized, you did it. I didn't do it myself, you know. So we have all these phrases in academia implying there is another agent who's the bad guy. And you know, this brings me back to the idea of personal responsibility, you know. And that's part of the whole package. Tell them you're responsible of your actions. You can do it, you can also not do it. You can realize that this is a fire brigade. If you do this thing, somebody will die. Are you stupid? You know? And so I think you should say that to them. But you can't say this, because if you do, you will be harassed and you will be criticized because you're not tolerant enough.
Is it true that the police rely on imams and for mediation?
Yes, they do. Yes, they rely on imams, and there was always I'm sure there are hundreds of cases. Even not only imams, but they also rely on drug kings for dialogues. Yeah, which is very interesting, you know, because this is like a very good illustration of the tolerant Swedish, naive, stupid society. Sorry to say that. Namely, that in an act of sheer desperation, the Swedish police and Swedish social workers contact not only imams, I mean imams possibly could be decent, but they contact the warlords basically in these clan tribes, and they say, look, you have an insight, you speak the language, and we would like to have a dialogue with you. And if you say that, if you call up and say that we'd like to have a dialogue with you, that is a very clear signal from the majority of society saying that we are weak, we don't understand your rationale, we're taking 4 quick steps back and you can move forward. Yeah? And then they say, yes, clearly we would like to have a discussion. And then they lie in your face and then they say this and that and this and that. And this is very logic. If you would be part of that gang, if you would be part of that, I don't know, cocaine dealing or whatever it is, and then you're faced with that kind of very, very, very gentle attitude, then you take that as a signal of pushing, of moving forward, and you do that, of course. And I just wonder how far things will go before mainstream Swedish society will understand that we need to protect our values. We need to protect this society because this society is a very good society. The Danish society too, of course. But I think the situation is much worse in Sweden. I have an impression that the Danish society is more solid somehow. The sense of cohesion in Danish society is much more solid. I think Swedish society is in a very, very bad shape.
And you think that has to do with too long of a period of peace and prosperity?
Yeah, partly, yes. Too long a period of peace and prosperity. And also there are other things too. Another thing I'd like to mention is that the whole, what do you call it, business, the whole industry of tolerance. We have a tolerance industry in Sweden, where academia is tolerant, people are tolerant, people are media, yes, everybody's very, very tolerant. And it has reached such proportions now, so if you question the tolerance, I mean, what you're actually basically doing, you're saying that I don't agree, I have a different approach. The fact that in Sweden, it is no longer a battle between ideas, it's no longer a battle between some arguments and a couple of other arguments. So, like the old classic thing, or what do you think about this? Okay, who has the best arguments? Now in Sweden, it's no longer that. It is about who's the best person. I'm better than you because I'm more tolerant than you are. Yeah. So people have somehow forgotten that the whole tolerance rhetoric is an idea. There's an ideology behind, and the ideology is the ideology of multiculturalism. It's the ideology of diversity. I never thought about it like this, but this is actually the case. So being virtuous, being nice, being sweet, being understanding, being open-minded is tantamount to multiculturalism. See? So there's the whole entourage is winning the game. And I'm supposed to be intolerant because I say the things I do. Basically the only thing I say, look, we need to talk about arguments here. We need to try to analyze what's inside multiculturalism. Is it a sweet, decent leftist idea, or is it actually a reactionary idea? Fostering enclaves, basically fostering a war between ethnic groups. If you say that, people say, "Oh, so I didn't think that about you. I thought you had other views." So this is also called what's called ad hominem. They don't listen to your views. They attack your character instead. Today, it's the discussion, even in academia, or maybe especially in academia, has gone from an argument between my arguments and your arguments, and see who has the best arguments. Maybe you win, that's good. Maybe I win, that's good. Now it's a discussion. It's not a discussion. It's just a statement of morality. It's a statement of tolerance. And if you can somehow pretend to be the most tolerant, then you win. You win the discussion. And tolerance is equal to multiculturalism. You see what I mean? We used to have the it was called the December Agreement, where all the other parties agreed, I think it was a year or two ago, where all the other parties agreed that we will not cooperate with the Sweden Democrats. Yeah? And then what they did, they praised one another for trying to save democracy. And my comment, it doesn't matter what I think about the Sweden Democrats, but I thought that was ludicrous. Because if you want to save democracy, you need to stick to the values of democracy. Namely, you need to listen to what the people are saying. And if there are 10% of the people who are supporting the Sweden Democrats, you need to listen to these people. Yeah? No? You need to listen to what they're saying. But I mean, now we have a situation in Sweden, even if the Sweden Democrats would have 20% or 25%, where the political mainstream, including the left-wing fanatics, the left-wing radicals, they can say this. They can say, we determine what is racism and what is not racism. Yeah? And then they say that we think that the Sweden Democrats is a racist party. We are not going to cooperate with this party. Yeah? We define it. Yes? And their definition of racism clearly is not my definition of racism. Because I think that, of course, Sweden Democrats, there are maybe 10-15% of the Sweden Democrats are people I wouldn't like to have a coffee with. But I'm completely convinced that the majority of the people who vote for the Swedish Democrats are just regular guys and regular women who are very dissatisfied with the things because they want to keep Sweden as it is. Yeah? They do not want to embark on this multicultural journey with a very uncertain ending. They don't want that. And I can give a lot of examples. I can give an example like Trelleborg, which is south of Malmö. Trelleborg and a lot of other cities, small cities. These cities used to be just regular cities dominated by Swedish people. I'm sorry to say that. Maybe now people might think that I'm a racist. But now, for instance, Trelleborg is dominated by Arabs and by Muslims. Yeah? The square and the city center in Trelleborg is dominated by these people. And my question to the politicians in Sweden, you can have a lot of questions, but one question is, did you ask these people who live in Trelleborg if they want this? Did you ask them? No, they didn't. There are, and it's the same thing in a lot of small cities in Sweden. Where I come from, Markaryd, I think it's the same thing, and there are a lot of cities with the same development. Small cities, and now they have quite a big Muslim community, and making a big mark in these communities. And there has been over the last 30 years, there has been surveys where you ask the Swedish population, what is your approach to immigration? And all of these surveys have shown basically one thing, that the majority of Swedish population, we want a more restrictive immigration policy. We have said it again and again and again and again. The majority say this, but instead the politicians, they have increased immigration. They have increased it and they have increased it. Wow. And over the last 5 years they have increased it tremendously.
Is it because of white guilt?
Yes, partly. Yeah, a friend of mine, Rumi Hassan, he wrote a book, and it's called Multiculturalism: Some Inconvenient Truths. And in this book, he launches the idea of the liberal post-colonial sense of guilt, and I think that says a lot about it. That says a lot of it. But there's another. You need to treat these people nice because we were so bad during the imperial period, the colonialist period. But there's another.
But Sweden wasn't an imperial world power.
We were not. No, that's true. But who cares? In Sweden, you can study post-colonialism, and then it's a funny thing. You can study post-colonialism and lash your back, and attack yourself until you bleed to death. You can do it even though we were never a colonial power. Interesting. But in academia, you can still study it because it's so great to hate yourself. That's what people are doing. Yeah. And I think that's my next book. The pleasure in self-harassment, the greatness in abusing yourself, denigrating yourself, torturing yourself, saying that we have nothing to be proud of. Because if you say that, it's like telling other people that they are nothing. So, but I think to get back to what you said about why is this happening? The lack of self-respect, because this is basically what it's about. There's no self-respect in the Swedish society. If you compare it to the Thai society, or even Vietnam, there's a lot of self-respect. This is part of my new book. George Orwell, he wrote about this a long time ago. In the 1920s, it was called the colonial craze. You're crazy about everything overseas. You're crazy about everything exotic. Everything exotic is fascinating, enriching, charming, etc. But everything native is not interesting. Quite boring. Christianity is boring. But Buddhism is interesting, fascinating. Alternative medicines in China, etc. Islam is interesting, and so a kind of very irrational temptation and a very irrational attraction for everything unknown. Yeah, and Orwell. To get back to Orwell, he says that to compare his approach with what's happening today. He said I know enough of the working class not to idealize it. That's very good. You know? He lived among miners in mid-England in the 1930s, and he wrote a fantastic book about it. You should read that book. And he said, I know enough of these people not to idealize them. And then he could say that what's happening now in Sweden is that people, they know very little about exotic cultures. They know very little about Islam, hence they can idealize them. If they knew a little bit more, if they realized what was going on, that it's not only this boutique multiculturalism, it's not only fascinating and enriching, there are also dark sides with it. For instance, the fact that women in Islam, they have 50%. You know, when somebody dies, the woman gets, if she's lucky, 50%. And she's worth less than half of a man. But if you realize these things, if you know more about foreign cultures, you tend to have less reason to idealize them. So and I think, so the lack, we're surrounded by a lot of cultures, and we know next to nothing about these cultures. I know very little about Vietnamese culture, even though I live there. Same with Thai culture. But this gives an opportunity for all of these well-meaning, left-leaning multiculturalists to idealize exotic cultures. Not because they know a lot about these cultures, but in contrast, because they know very little about these cultures. This gives them an opportunity to idealize these cultures. Because if they knew more, they would realize that there are a lot of things going on here, you know. I cannot idealize people from the Netherlands, for instance. I couldn't do that because I know too much about them, you know. I know too much about the Netherlands. I couldn't say that people from the Netherlands, they are enriching Swedish society. That's ridiculous. Nobody would say that, yeah. You can't say that I think that Belgians are fascinating. No, so you can't say that people from Belgium are enriching, but you know very little about Muslims. You can say that Muslims are enriching, which reveals that you know nothing about Muslims. Because if you did, you would realize that these are individuals, you know, and you need to find out again what I was talking about before. You need to think, who are these people coming here? Clearly, there are a lot of immigrants who are great, who are working, and who are doing a good job, but this is obvious. You know, this is obvious. The problem is not all of them. The problem is a part of them. But I would say that the percentage of immigrants not respecting Swedish customs and traditions and laws is clearly bigger than you know, among Swedish population. Clearly bigger. And that's why we have a problem. Yeah? That's why we have a problem. And maybe I can give you a little compliment. Do you know our integration? We have integration policies for people from Vietnam. Do you know about it? Well, neither do I. You know why? Because we have no problem with people from Vietnam. There was a friend of mine who said, you know, what do you think about these integration efforts for Hungarians? And I said, what? And he said, yeah, that's my proof of the pudding, he said. There is no integration for, you know, we don't need to integrate Hungarians. They come and they work, or Chinese people. So the very notion of integration is a sign of a problem. We have integration, but we only have an integration policy for certain people.
Toward the end of our interview, I asked Dr. Adamson what he meant when he argues that leftist multiculturalism mirrors right-wing racism.
A racist would say that we don't like black people, yeah, because they don't know black people. This is stereotypical, collectivist, ridiculous idea. But multiculturalists, they say, we love black people. But the underlying rationale is the same. They say this because they don't know black people, they have no idea, they don't know their faces, then they don't know that these are actually individuals. So the ignorance gives an opportunity for stereotypical opinions in either direction, whether you idealize them or you hate them. You can have these collectivist ideas. But one thing is required, your ignorance. Because if you know things about other cultures, you can't say these things because it's preposterous. In the eyes of people from other cultures, if they can think and hear, and of course they can, this is clearly a stereotype. This is clearly a racist attitude. You know, if you say that to people from Ethiopia, we think Ethiopians are charming. Every Ethiopian would look at us like, "Have you been drinking or something? How can you say these things? You don't know me. I have a cousin. He's an asshole." You know, you see what I mean? So if you get closer to people, you need to put all these stupid stereotypical ideas, whether you idealize people or you hate them, whether you're a multiculturalist or a racist, put them in the bin where they belong. You know. So my next book is about the fact that I think that there are a lot of similarities between the racist attitude, the conservative reactionary attitude towards exotic people, and the multicultural attitude. One of them they both put them on pedestals. The racists put them on a pedestal and say, "Oh, you know, you little monkey, you know. We look at you, you're charming, but you know, you're pretty nasty and stupid and ugly, you know." And the other multiculturalists, they also put them on a pedestal and they say, "We put you up there, and you're so charming and enriching, and we do love you, you know. And you're not interested to who they are, you're not interested in their faces, and above all, you will not allow them to climb down and be among you and judge them like anybody. You will not allow that. You idealize them or you hate them." See, that's what you do. I think the biggest threat for society now is not the racists, because you can see them and smell them immediately. The biggest threat are the people who pretend to be virtuous. And they are all over Swedish academia, all over media, all over the place. And they are the big menace for Swedish society, because they pretend to be superior.
For my last question, I asked him bluntly how much of a role he thinks Islam plays in this discussion on failed multiculturalism in Sweden.
A lot. Yeah, a lot. I mean, you could say, some people say that it has nothing to do with religion. I can just answer very briefly. Some people say it has nothing to, it's a violation of a decent, peaceful faith. But, I mean, first of all, if you say that, that's like flying in the face of the idea that Islam is a bold religion. And everybody, if you talk to any imam, if you talk to any good decent, believing Muslim, they say that Islam is strong, Islam has rules for everything, etc. It's a very bold faith. It is much bolder, much stronger, much more forceful than Christianity, because Christianity has passed the Enlightenment, the test of Enlightenment, and it barely survived, and then it has passed the test of Marxism, and Islam hasn't gone through these things. So Islam is still, it's like it hasn't been challenged the way Christianity has. And then if you say, you know, Islam is like it's other things, of course it isn't. Islam has a huge impact on people's lives. And I actually would like to say that if you say that this is an aberration to an inherently peaceful faith, I think that shows that you have very, very weak arguments. Because if this is your best argument, you have nothing. I'm puzzled by the fact that so many Westerners, they accept this explanation. They do. I mean, nobody would say that about National Socialism, nobody would say that about fascism, nobody would say that in Europe, nobody would say that about Catholicism. But Islam somehow is different. It's like the word Islamophobia, which is just bullshit, of course. It's just bullshit. It's like if you're afraid of Islam, it's like you're afraid of spiders or rats. I do think that Islam, in terms of capacity to kill people or capacity to create vengeance, I think spiders and Islam are different. If you criticize Christianity, you're not phobic. No, you can't criticize Christianity. Christianity allows for criticism. Islam does not allow for criticism. You know, what does that mean? It means we give special favors. We actually give special favors to a creed we somehow consider to be especially weak, because this creed does not allow for criticism. This is bananas.
And that was Göran Adamson, an associate professor of sociology at University West in Trojan, Sweden. If you enjoy my work, please consider becoming a supporter through Subscribestar, Patreon, or PayPal. I've lost about 40% of my Patreon support over the controversies surrounding the site's political bias, so your support at this moment will really help me. You can find the links in the description.